Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're trying to look past the usual headlines, the debates you hear about sex work. We want to bring you something more direct. The raw, unfiltered truth from people who've actually lived it.
Yeah, if you've been following the discussions, maybe the arguments about agency versus exploitation, this deep dive is going to give you some, well, really powerful firsthand accounts that might challenge how you see things.
Exactly. Our mission here is to really immerse ourselves in these personal journeys. We want to understand the challenges people faced, why they got involved in the first place, and crucially, their paths towards recovery, towards advocacy. And just be clear, we're focusing only on the testimonies we have from these specific video excerpts.
And through these stories, you'll get a much clearer sense, almost a visceral sense, of the huge physical and mental toll this kind of work takes. We'll look at the coercive forces, sometimes subtle, sometimes really brutal. We'll touch on the legal side, especially how things are in Germany.
Yeah.
And you'll see the incredible resilience it takes, not just to survive, but to actually rebuild a life.
It definitely offers a perspective, a more nuanced one that might make you rethink some common assumptions. So, okay, let's start right at the beginning. How do people actually get into sex work? Because the paths, well, they're really diverse and often, maybe more often than people think, not entirely voluntary. We heard from one woman, she's unnamed in the material, who first saw it as like an easy source of income. The barrier to entry felt very low.
Right, that initial perception.
But then the reality, working across different places, seeing at least 25 to 35 customers a day, every single day.
That number is just hard to fathom.
It is. She said it pushed her beyond my limits, physically and mentally, and her conclusion. She called it the worst job on earth that anyone can have. That's not just, an opinion. It completely counters that easy money idea and shows this deep disillusionment that seems pretty common.
And you see that financial pressure cropping up again and again.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's just desperate need. Vivian, for instance, she talked very openly about just wanting to afford more than the bare necessities, to live a little. This was after finishing high school, doing social work, but still really struggling.
Yeah, and Christina's story, her whole youth, she said, was defined by this lack of money, dealing with state benefits being cut back, just this constant fight for basics.
It paints a picture of real precarity leading into it.
But it wasn't always just about the money, was it? Vivian had this really striking insight into her own reasons. She admitted, I had very low self-esteem. She actually believed that the only way I could get positive attention and validation is by having sex with men, sort of reducing herself to that.
That's incredibly revealing.
Yeah.
And heartbreaking.
It is. And she even felt it was normal for men to have access to my body, like she wasn't allowed to say no. That shows such a deep vulnerability, almost an erosion of self-worth before the exploitation really ramps up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you talk about vulnerability, Christina's experiences, they represent the most extreme end of that spectrum. Childhood trauma, direct coercion, her memories are just awful, tearing out her own toenails at age 3, enduring constant violence and coercion in foster care and children's homes.
It's hard to even comprehend.
And then the ultimate betrayal. At 18, her own mother, who's dealing with addiction and sex work herself, sold her to a pimp.
Unbelievable.
And it wasn't just once. Christina described being sold on again and again to different pimps. A cycle that just went on like that for years.
So the idea of choice in that context, it just evaporates, doesn't it?
Completely. It's a luxury some people simply never encounter.
Okay, so given these entry points, some born from desperation, some from deep trauma like Christina's, what was life actually like inside the scene? You mentioned the physical and mental onslaught. That woman seeing 25 to 35 clients a day, pushing her beyond my limits.
Yeah, and Vivian echoed that feeling, but maybe from a more internal perspective. She described this extreme dislike towards my clients, a constant feeling of disgust and rejection, always asking herself, what am I doing here?
That internal conflict must be exhausting.
And it manifested physically for her. She talked about constant stomach pains and infections, like chronic vaginal infections. She felt her body literally resisted doing this work so much.
Wow. Her body rebelling.
And then there's the fear, the constant fear for safety. She described being alone with men somewhere where I didn't even know where I was, needing a total stranger to drive her home, and just knowing I had to have sex with this man or something could happen to me. That level of dread.
That's terrifying.
Later, she tried being a dominatrix, maybe thinking it offered more control, but the demands were disturbing. Urinating on men, inflicting pain to the point of bleeding. She found it just disgusting. And her conclusion was pretty clear. These men Needed a therapist, not me.
Which brings us back to Christina's experience with violence. Not from clients necessarily, but from pimps. The things she listed. Cigarettes put out on her body, being thrown through windows, beaten with a baseball bat, left unconscious, locked in a car trunk. It's pure brutality.
It is. And you asked earlier about the impact of that sustained trauma, how it changes your sense of self, your relationship with your own body.
Yeah.
Well, Christina's own words are incredibly powerful here. She makes this statement that really cuts through the idea of consent in a transactional context. She says, even though I was paid for it, being with a customer was psychological rape. Even if I allowed it in exchange for money, mentally I experienced rape every day.
Psychological rape, even when paid.
Exactly. It forces you to question what choice or consent even means when someone's agency is just systematically crushed by coercion, by violence, by sheer economic need. Payment doesn't erase the violation.
No.
And how do you cope with that? For Christina, it was drugs. She said she endured the scene by doing drugs, becoming severely addicted to cocaine just to numb my emotions.
Understandable, in a way. A survival mechanism.
A very destructive one. The mental toll was huge. She admitted she thought about suicide a lot, feeling completely worthless. And on top of everything, the money situation actually got worse. She noted sex work became harder because of cut-rate prices offered by Eastern European women.
So more competition, driving prices down.
Right, leading to these brutal daily costs, like needing 160 euros just for rent each day. Sometimes that meant needing 6 customers just to cover the room.
6 customers just for rent.
Often leaving her with only enough for 1 meal a day because the rest went to her addiction and her pimp. It's a spiral.
This really highlights the importance of the broader context, doesn't it? Particularly Germany's legal situation that the sources mentioned. They talk about how changes like the abolition of important criminal provisions, along with the EU expanding eastward to include Romania and Bulgaria, led to this explosion of the market in Germany.
Exactly. It wasn't just a minor legal tweak. It fundamentally changed the landscape.
How did that explosion impact people like Christina on the ground?
Well, it directly intensified the exploitation. More women, often from more desperate situations, meant plummeting prices. This forced women already there, like Christina, into even riskier situations just to meet those daily costs we just discussed. And it turned Germany into a kind of sex tourism hub. The sources even cite an ad from a U.S. company openly promoting Germany for exactly that reason.
What did the ad say?
It called Germany the ideal destination for sex tourism because prices are low, everything's regulated, everything's legal. Their conclusion was stark. You won't find these conditions in any other country in the world.
So the legal framework, intended perhaps to regulate, ended up creating conditions ripe for exploitation on a mass scale and even marketed internationally.
That seems to be the implication, yes. And despite this legality, prosecuting crimes within the industry remains incredibly difficult.
The conviction rate is shockingly low, right? Only about 20%.
That's right. And the core reason, fear. The sources state clearly, women are afraid to testify because they fear reprisals.
Reprisals from who?
From the perpetrators, the pimps, the traffickers, fear of being attacked themselves or having their families threatened back in their home countries. So even within a legal system, that vulnerability, that fear, it paralyzes justice.
So leaving this world, it's not just a matter of walking away, is it? How does someone even begin to heal, let alone advocate for change after all that?
It's an immense struggle. Leaving the scene and trying to reintegrate into what we call normal life is incredibly hard. Look at Vivian. She was literally living parallel lives, working her social work job during the day, seeing clients at night, then dragging herself up at 6 a.m. for her normal job again. That kind of split existence takes a huge toll.
Yeah, exhausting just thinking about it.
And Christina found returning to normal life so difficult after stopping drugs cold turkey that she actually went back to the scene initially.
Really? Why?
She described this flood of emotions hitting her, feelings she'd been numbing for years. It was overwhelming. She felt like a completely different person she didn't even recognize. The known hell felt safer, perhaps, than the unknown emotional territory.
That makes a terrifying kind of sense. But there are turning points, moments of hope. The role of support systems seems critical.
Absolutely vital. Christina talks about carrying this phone number for years, a number given to her by street workers.
Just carrying it.
Yes. And then, one day, after her pimp threatened to kill her, beat her mercilessly, she finally called it. That call led her to a shelter. And she says unequivocally, if there hadn't been a shelter like that, I'd probably be dead.
Wow. That underscores the importance of those outreach workers, those safety nets, however small they seem.
Definitely. And then begins the long process of reclaiming identity, building a future. It's not quick, it's not easy. Vivian admits it's still difficult for me to accept that I was once in prostitution. And dealing with men day to day, the thought that every man could be a client still haunts her.
That must be incredibly hard to navigate in daily life.
Her path involved a lot of therapy, and meeting her current partner was also significant. She was driven by this deep desire to leave the life behind completely so it wouldn't destroy her chance at real intimacy or my sex life.
And for Christina, the major turning point seemed to be her daughter, right?
Yes, a profound shift. Initially, she felt she couldn't cope. She wanted to give the baby up for adoption.
But something changed.
Around the 7th month of pregnancy, she said her maternal instincts kicked in. That connection sparked a fight in her, not just for her daughter, Kira, but for herself. She resolved not to go back to sex work.
And the shelter provided more than just safety.
Much more. She talks about the healing power of finding peace and quiet, the stability, the simple routines like housework, talking with staff, other women who understood, getting counseling, occupational therapy. It was a space to finally breathe and begin healing.
And it sounds like she's very consciously trying to break a cycle.
Very consciously. She directly compares herself to her mother, the one who sold her, but is determined to do exactly the opposite for Kira, raising her daughter to stand up for herself.
That takes incredible strength.
It does. And what's also profound is her desire now to understand her mother, maybe even forgive her. Alongside that personal healing, both women have built new futures. Vivian is a social worker now. Christina wants to finish her degree, work perhaps in a retirement home or with teenagers. They found stability. And Christina even says she's optimistic about the future.
From where they started, that optimism is incredibly powerful.
It really is. Their journey showed this reclamation of agency, piece by painful piece.
And emerging from that personal journey, they seem to have a collective message, one that directly challenges a common narrative.
Yes, the myth of the happy, self-determined sex worker. They push back hard against that. Christina says flat out, in all my years, I've never seen anyone doing voluntary sex work. And Vivian estimates that for 95% of people, that is simply not the reality.
95%, that's a stark statistic based on her experience. It's not just anecdotal. It directly confronts a widely held, perhaps convenient, belief.
Precisely. And their lived experience actually aligns pretty closely with the position of the European Parliament.
What's their stance?
They state quite clearly that prostitution is not a normal activity, that it fundamentally violates human dignity. Their conclusion is that demand must be curbed and that the focus needs to shift towards holding clients, those buying sex, accountable.
So shifting responsibility towards the demand side.
That's the argument. And Vivian is actively putting this into practice through her advocacy work with an organization called Sisters. She goes into the red light district, offers small things like sweets and flowers, just simple gestures to connect with the women there, often facing language barriers, using Google Translate on her phone.
Trying to build bridges.
And advocating for legal changes in Germany, because her core message is she doesn't want women to continue to be seen as a commodity.
And she has a direct message for young women too, doesn't she?
A very direct, urgent plea. She says, please, please don't do it. Ask yourself the question, what could it do to you? And above all, talk to people about it.
Talk to people. Don't isolate yourself with the decision.
Exactly. And she draws this sharp distinction, emphasizing that sex work has nothing to do with sexual self-determination or emancipation. Why? Because, as she puts it, you're selling part of your body, and it's all about the sexuality of men.
That reframing is powerful, moving it away from ideas of liberation towards the reality of commodification.
Yeah, what really comes through from all these stories is this deep, often uncomfortable understanding of the harsh realities. You see the incredible resilience it takes just to survive. And you see the urgent need for us to shift how we think about this, how policies are shaped. These experiences, they really do challenge the simpler narratives and show the human cost that's often ignored in debates or hidden by legal structures.
It really does take enormous courage for people to share these parts of their lives, to open up those wounds so that we can understand better. And it feels vital, doesn't it, for us listening to actually engage with these truths, even when they're uncomfortable, to really hear these voices, their journeys moving towards recovery, towards advocacy. It's an incredible testament to strength, to hope, finding a way to turn profound suffering into a call for change.
Absolutely. And maybe as you, the listener, reflect on these testimonies, here's something to consider. If this deep violation of human dignity seems to be the consistent thread running through these lived experiences, what does that mean about our collective responsibility? What's our role in dismantling the systems, both the legal ones and the societal attitudes, that allow this kind of violation to happen, that even profit from it? How do we make sure human dignity is truly non-negotiable, everywhere, even in the corners of society we might prefer not to look at?